Hi, my name is Laura Jackson. I am Head of Audit and Audit Partner at BDO Northern Ireland. We're here at Methodist College, Belfast today, talking to Sebastian Payne, leader, writer and columnist for the Times. Welcome, Sebastian.
Hello, good to be here.
So tell us, is this your first time in Northern Ireland?
This is my second time, actually. I came here in 2020 with the then new editor of the FT, the Financial Times I used to work with, Rudolf Halaf, who had never been to Belfast, and it was at the peak of all the Brexit drama. And so we flew in at 7 a.m. and went straight to Stormont. We saw Julian Smith, who was then the Northern Ireland Secretary, had lunch with Arlene Foster, who was then First Minister, then flew back to London that evening. So slightly different visit.
Yeah, so there's big name drops this time, big name drops last time. So do you want to tell us what we've been doing today or summarise for our audience? What have we been doing today?
So we've had a group of, I think, 10 schools who've all competed in a mock challenge to be the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England to try and make a decision on whether to raise, hold or reduce interest rates, just as the real Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee does every month. And each of the schools who participated have presented to us for 10 minutes on their decision. Some of them setting out economic theory, some of them setting out how they got there, and some of them even role-playing an actual MPC meeting. And then they took questions from our illustrious panel today, and then we decided who were the top three and then who was the winner.
So we were very lucky. We had Gillian Anderson with us from Bank of England and Professor Richard Ramsey, Professor of Practice from Queen's Business School with us today as well to join us in our deliberations. So we were very lucky. We had three finalists and a winning team who decided that they would cut the interest rate on behalf of the Bank of England. What did you think of the final team and their presentation on that recommendation?
Well, it was a fascinating decision because the kind of accepted opinion would be to hold interest rates at the moment. The majority of the schools who competed did hold interest rates, aware that there's a budget coming in 6 weeks' time and they don't necessarily rock the boat too much. But the school that did win actually sort of challenged that by mocking up an MPC meeting, and the arguments for cutting rates was actually more persuasive, so they did that. In the Q&A, we kind of really pushed them whether this was the right thing to do, would it risk stoking inflation and the rest of it. But their presentation, their understanding of economic and fiscal theory was very deep and persuasive, and they got some very tough questions from our panellists, who from a real Bank of England employee, and we thought they did very well, and that's why they deserved first place.
Yeah. So BDO Northern Ireland, we are very involved with grassroots talent, and we're very involved in schools, programmes, various initiatives, and this is our first year of sponsoring this challenge. We think it's really worthwhile. We're very keen to encourage entrepreneurship and an interest in economics in that sort of age group. What advice would you give to somebody who is studying economics at the minute?
Well, I've rattled through some of this, and we were in the hall afterwards speaking to the pupils, but the advice I always give is think about your USP, what's your unique selling point as a student, because there's so many pupils who go through university now and are all amazingly talented. I mean, look at the sheer talent that we've seen today of up-and-coming economists, and saying to them, if you're going to look to a world to be an economist or work in politics or academia or the media, you've got to find your own thing that makes you stand out, your own experience or skill area or specialism. So that's the thing I would kind of really give, is to focus on that as well, and also pursue every opportunity you can. When I started in journalism, I just did work experience after work experience at every paper I could get my foot in the door to try and eventually get a job. And I think the fact you've had so many schools and so many engaged people participating in this competition today just shows that they grasp that. We've just got to keep doing it.
Yeah. And so throughout today, I've heard you talk about your think tank, I've heard you talk about your podcast that you've been on, I've heard you talk about the novels you've written, I've heard you talk about your day job. If you reflect back on all of those things, is there any particular career highlights that you'd like to share with us, or anything that is insightful into the career of Sebastian Payne?
Well, it's sort of an odd highlight, but going on Air Force One with Barack Obama during my time at the Washington Post was quite the experience. And in the kind of pre-Trump world, it all feels very sanitized. But I was very fortunate enough to be the 35th Lawrence Stern Fellow, which is an annual fellowship where we send a young British journalist over to DC and they get to experience the heart of the Washington Post. And I mean, spending time on Air Force One, on Capitol Hill, in the White House, in terms of journalism, that was absolutely fantastic to to do from that part of my life. I mean, I've been very lucky that I've written 2 books, one on the 2019 general election, the so-called Red Wall, which was the kind of Labour heart and collapse. And I spent a year travelling around northern and Midlands of England, investigating that, and then also writing a book within a 6-week period about the fall of Boris Johnson, which was quite the feat. So getting those 2 out, and every time you publish a book, to see it in a bookshop, to do the events, it's just the most fantastic thing. But I love what I do now so much at the Times, to be in a very privileged position as a leader writer, which is writing the paper's daily editorials. And it's like being a speechwriter for the editor, but also the institution of trying to imbibe, the discussions. It's the most amazing minds that we have working at the Times, coming to a collective view and then writing it and then watching it go off, and opinion formers in politics and beyond either loving it or sometimes not loving it as much.
Yeah, and it seems to me that you've done a really good job of marrying being a journalist, having a view on politics and business. All 3 of those threads you've married really well. How have you gone about doing that, do you think?
So I think working at the Financial Times I did for 8 years was really important for that, because journalists, dare I say it, by their making, are not necessarily the most literate of people, but I'd come from a computer science background, so I studied computer science at University of Durham, and so I had at least a basic understanding of data and statistics. So when it came to trying to get my foot in the door in journalism, I had a bit of a different, going back to that USP point, from everyone else. But working at the Financial Times, you're aware that every story you write can affect the markets, can affect the way things are seen across the City of London and beyond. So you have to have an extra level of rigour than you would get elsewhere. So it was partly that, and partly just interest as well from myself, that I think that, we're in such unique and volatile economic times. It's been a big theme of the Monetary Policy Challenge today, in terms of globalization almost coming to an end, the free trade era decoupling from politics. All these things require you getting stuck into that as well. And I think with the business element as well, particularly when I did my travels around the country for the book, I was very keen to make sure that, a lot of the places that voted for Brexit in 2016, voted for Boris Johnson in 2019, and may vote reform in the 2029 general election. These are places that have gone through great deindustrialization. They've got huge, big employers back in the day of coal, steel, manufacturing, mining, and they've all now been replaced by smaller, medium enterprise businesses. Those are now the main part of employment. And only by driving around it, I really appreciate how important that is to the wider economy. So I try and bring that all into my views on politics.
And at BDO, obviously, we see small and medium-sized businesses the backbone of our economy, and are very privileged to serve them. And we see that. You mentioned that, not everybody might like your story. And obviously journalism, there's been a lot of discussion at the minute around sort of the freedom of journalism. How do you see that evolving in the next couple of years, or how do you flex your resilience muscle as you continue to work as a journalist?
Well, first of all, I'm very lucky that the Times is the most trusted newspaper in the country, according to some various surveys. So I think that's the first thing. And the thing about the Times is, it's been printing since 1750, I believe, and it's developed a reputation over literally hundreds of years of being the paper record for the UK, but respected across the world for its reporting, but for its analysis and comment, where I work on the paper, which is wants to be fair and balanced, is our kind of approach to commentary as well. And when it comes to the newspaper's editorials, which are written collectively by a team of us, it's a bit like we're sort of filtering the tea in the teacup in a way of opinion, that we're trying to cool passions, take a dispassionate head while taking a view as and when we need to. When it comes to columns and opinions that I have myself as well, I mean, I've been very fortunate that having ran a think tank for 2 years, which, was my think tank, it's through my kind of worldview, my centre-right worldview. My view is broadly shared by that of the Times as an institution. But I think when it comes to commentary, I always try and think you've got to think about the other side, you've got to think about people who don't necessarily agree with it, and just not speak to those who already agree with you. Because one of the big problems of the media is siloification. Social media has had a really bad impact on this, people getting into their silos and not looking outside of it. And I think newspapers have a very important role, and it's very important for all newspapers and print media and podcasts and whatever else to make sure that you're not just speaking to your audience, because if you do, everyone's worldview becomes narrower and narrower.
Yeah, I think going forward, the role of the journalist in the role of educator is going to be more important than ever before.
Hugely.
And as you're saying, as being balanced and fair. We talked a bit today, and we heard from the students about the forthcoming autumn budget and whether or not this decision they would make about holding or cutting the interest rate and how they should consider that. what are your predictions? Probably a very unfair question at this stage for the, maybe if you're able to share them for the forthcoming autumn budget.
Well, it was interesting, this pupils today, how many of them chose to hold interest rates.
Yes.
I think it was the right thing to do because of the uncertainty around. I mean, it's pretty clear that there is going to be a hole to be filled in the public finances. That's been clear for quite a long time, because in her first budget, Rachel Reeves did not leave much headroom. You know, that's the gap to rainy day money in terms of the public finances. And so that gap was wiped out quite quickly thanks to geopolitical events, not least Donald Trump's tariffs, the continued wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. So there's going to be a hole there. The question could be 10 to 30 billion, with the Institute for Fiscal Studies saying it's most likely to be about 22 billion. And if it's in that region, filling that hole, you can't scrabble down the back of the sofa. You know, you can
I read that at the weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
You
can sort of try and push out thresholds on income tax, for example. But I think ultimately there's only three options. You can raise borrowing, you can raise taxes, or you can cut spending. I think Rachel Reeves will not be able to raise borrowing because the UK's debt pile is already pretty high. In terms of spending, I think it's going to be very difficult for her to cut spending, even though that's where I think her focus should be. That if you look at the spending on the welfare bill, for example, where sickness and disability benefit is going to reach 100 billion by the end of the decade, that needs a serious rethink, but she's going to clash right with the views of Labour MPs. So that means tax rises, and what she can do that's not inflationary, but it is also not regressive, but with also the strict straitjacket of the Labour manifesto, because that manifesto promised no rises in personal VAT, income tax, or national insurance. So how you make all that add up, it's a bit of a conundrum, but I think there will be a combination of some tax rises, some spending cuts, potentially penciled in for the future, so it's credible to the bond markets as the Office for Budget Responsibility, but not necessarily one you have to get Labour MPs to vote on straight away.
Okay, that's a very, very good answer. Well, thank you for your time today, and thank you for the time you spent with the students and just your reflections with me. And I hope you have a lovely, I know you're staying for some more time in Northern Ireland this weekend, so enjoy Northern Ireland and enjoy our tourism, and thank you again. That was another episode of Beyond the Numbers for BDO Northern Ireland.